And then we empower our employees. It's very important. We're not old school where, you can't do anything for the guest without my approval, because the guests today, they want immediate satisfaction. So if we can, let me give you a bottle of water to go, we apologize for that problem. Let me give you a Coke from the market to take with you on us. If it's during the stay, let me upgrade you to a suite that's sitting there vacant anyway. You're by the elevator, I'm going to switch you now to a different floor. Maybe I'm going to discount your room. Maybe I'm going to give you priority points. We empower our employees to try to make it right, to do something for the guests where they feel like you care, because the perception is in most of these hotels when a guest has a problem that the employees really don't care. And I think we've got to show that, I may not be able to give you a free night for 3 nights, but I can give you something to show that I personally care about your predicament.
Welcome to Deep Current, the podcast where we go beneath the surface of the industries people rely on every day and talk about leaders shaping what comes next. I'm your host, Andy Monge. Today, we're diving into hospitality with Richard Alberigo, founder and CEO of Alberigo Hotel Management. Richard has more than 3 decades of hospitality leadership experience, and his journey started as a bellman, if I'm not mistaken. Took him through hotel operations and regional leadership with IHG, and ultimately led him to establish Alberigo Hotel Management in 2014. So today, Alberigo supports hotel owners through third-party management, sales, revenue management, and ownership consulting across multiple major brands. So the company has also been repeatedly recognized by Lodging Magazine, and Richard has been named the top Houston CEO of the Houston Business Journal in 2024. So congratulations on that. What makes this conversation especially interesting to me is that the tension hospitality leaders are facing right now, like operating costs are rising, technology is moving quickly, guests are still expecting a generally human experience. So how do you scale accountability and performance without turning hospitality into a transaction? That's like the main focus for today. So Richard, welcome to Deep Current. I'm glad to have you here.
Andy, really good to be here.
Amazing. So Richard, I really want to know a little bit more about yourself and how you started in this. How about you give us like a quick background?
So believe it or not, my name actually means hotel in Italian. So it seems like fate, but not really, because my career goal was to be in communications, to be a broadcaster. I dabbled as a DJ and I did sports and news on the radio. And I actually did hotels kind of on the side, quote unquote, for beer money. I was just out of college, and I realized right away that being into radio took a long road to start making money. So my dad was in the hotel business, but it really never interested me. And all of a sudden, one day when I was working at a front desk job at a hotel, at a full service Hilton hotel, somebody just came up to me and they said, "Hey, wouldn't you want to be a manager?" And I said, "I'm not really sure. I just like working the front desk because I always enjoyed, dealing with people. And it was kind of a fun outlet." And got my first promotion to front office manager. And then the rest was history. At that point, I gave up the DJ and the news on the radio and said, well, let me try to make this work, and became, like you said in the intro, I became a bellman as well. And that was the best job I think I've ever had, right? Because, everybody loved Richard in the hotel. And as we know, when you're at the front desk of a hotel, you're the face of the hotel. So you get mostly complaints instead of the compliments. As a bellman, everybody loved me, right? And they gave me money. They were giving me cash. So I said, this was awesome. So it was really a tough transition to go from bellman back to front desk. And, I took the hit. Obviously, I took a salary cut, went back to the front desk, and the rest is history. And that was like 30 years ago.
Wow. Congrats. Great story. So how do we go? You already told the story of starting as a bellman, right? And then eventually building your own company. So what I want to begin with is like something different. Like maybe it's more than a 12-year journey, right? It's what the company is today, and simply not possible without you starting it and in your background. So how can you scale, or what can a company do when every decision is still dependent on Richard?
Well, I think it's building the good team, Andy. I think that's the most important part of it. We preach that in our hotels. The leader of the hotel is just one person. And yes, they're the director, They have to oversee, they have to motivate, they have to hire, they have to, get people to do a better job than they even think they're capable of. But you've got to have the people. And, I've said that right from the beginning is it's not just me. Yes, I'm the one that started the company. When I started the company 12 years ago, it was just me. I did everything. I did sales, operations, because you had to build up a clientele before you start hiring. The worst thing that could happen is if you hire somebody and then you don't have any more hotels. And now what are you going to do with these people? And then you have a bad reputation. So I think it's hiring the right people. I think that's the key, hiring people smarter than yourself. I always say I'm kind of the backseat driver, but I need someone to drive the bus. I can't be the driver. And I think that's the key, is to find the right people that fit the culture that I want to build.
That's the best mentality I think to have. I think it was Steve Jobs that said, if we're hiring smart people and telling them what to do, instead of them telling us what to do, we're doing a bad job. So I
Correct.
think I agree with you 100%. What was the hardest responsibility to delegate or to hand off to someone else?
I think the hardest responsibility was when you did everything by yourself, and then you had to start trusting people, right? When you're a general manager of a hotel, you're trusting 20, 25 employees, but now you're trusting one, two, three corporate individuals that are in charge of an entire department. And, we all want, of course, when you have a vision and you start a company, you have your own spin on things and what you think works and what you think doesn't. And now I've got to trust someone else that maybe has a differing opinion than me. And, there's different ways to make it work. But that's the most difficult thing, is to say, you know what, I may not have done it that way. I've been successful. I need to take a deep breath and take a step back and kind of watch the results. I think that, you have to be patient too. I think that's important. And that's, to me, that was the most difficult part, is trust. And you have to see it work to really buy into the trust factor, because even there's a caption that's above your head that's always saying, I'm not sure because you wouldn't have done this way, Richard. So that was always the most difficult thing. And even to this day, you always have your own opinion, but you got to take a
Mhm.
deep breath and you've got to trust someone else to make a decision. Then if it doesn't work out, then we may change it, but you got to give them a shot, because once an individual feels like you don't trust them, they're not going to do a good job. They're going to be walking on eggshells. So, we always say, with our company, trust but verify, right? Verify they're actually working hard and doing a good job, but you got to give them the reins.
That makes a lot of sense. And do you feel like there's a part of your organization right now that still depends a lot on you, or a lot more on you than you would like?
Actually not. My name is probably what's going to sell it, because I have a great reputation in the industry since I've been around so long. So when they hear my name, it's synonymous with great hotels, because we've done it now for 12 years. And, even before that, when I worked with IHG, I had 50 hotels. So I've had, probably 20 years of multiple hotel experience. So I had a lot of contacts. So people know me, they know my name now. When I go to a conference, someone that's maybe never met me, they say, "Well, I've heard of the name." The name's unique too, so it's not like, Joe Smith. So they've heard of me, but they didn't really know, exactly what I did. So that makes me feel good. So I think it's a little bit of that.
That's perfect. I love it. And your company describes itself like as a hands-on and highly personalized, right? So this is a powerful message, and I think for a few
That's
for the
correct.
properties per se and the owners per se, it's even better, because that way your portfolio grows by that message. But as it grows, it might be complicated, right?
That's right. That's
So
right.
can this become like a bottleneck? How are you preventing that?
So we definitely, our competition, a lot of our competitors, have 200, 300 hotels. We've never had more than, 20 to 22 hotels at a time. I'm not saying that we wouldn't get to 30, but I don't want to have 200 hotels, because I know what that means. Then you start depending only on systems and processes, and then you divert away from the people. No matter how many people you hire, it becomes, like you said, overwhelming or a bottleneck. So we are going to always stick with our goal of, visiting the properties more often than the bigger competitors, being hands-on. And hands-on doesn't mean micromanaging. It means just going to the properties and seeing what's going on. Perfect example, we had this hotel that arrival experience was their problem, right? So if you're just looking at a computer all day and looking at the scores, your first impression would be, if that's arrival experience is the problem, the front desk is not welcoming and greeting. So I remember early on, when I went to the property, I saw that the trash can was overflowing, the curbs weren't painted, but the front desk agent was, cheerleader. They had almost have the pom poms out there. They were welcoming, they were fun. So it wasn't the front desk agent; it was the arrival experience before they got to the front desk. And if you just looked at a computer, you'd be like, "We need to make a change with the staffing at the front desk," and that wasn't the case. So that's we have several examples. The pool, you always think it's the dirty water if the pool has a bad score, but it may be, the chairs need to be replaced. Maybe there's weeds coming up. Maybe the fence needs to be painted, whatever the case may be. And it's not necessarily the water, right? So breakfast is another example. You always think if there's a problem with breakfast, it's the food. But again, it may be the server. It may be they're not wiping the tables, whatever the case may be. So that's why we have to get to the property and actually watch it in action before we make an analysis on what the problem is or what we need to work.
That's actually pretty good. And in my personal experience, yeah, I think if you look at the numbers, just numbers, you can create some like false ideas behind what the issue really is. And me personally, I mean, if I'm gonna give a review, I'm never giving a review or a complaint in with much detail. I'm just saying, hey, I didn't like this or this part of the property, whatever. So it makes sense. Yeah, I completely understand. And what should every owner receive consistently, regardless of the property size or brand?
What the owner should receive?
Yeah. What does the owner of the property should receive, like regardless of the property size and brand or whatever?
So
What is
so
something essential?
basically, we've got to make sure that we do the best we can to maximize the product because we take over hotels that are brand new, we take over new builds, we take over 20, 25-year-old properties. So the consistency of standards, what's acceptable, what's not, it's kind of like the best practices, like this is a football type thing, right? We have to get down to the basics because the basics, they don't lie. There's always a floor, and then there's a ceiling on what you can do with a particular property, but we've got to maximize the performance of the property, and that's by using, making sure that we got the right people in place, making sure we're always smiling, making sure we're always greeting, making sure that the expenses are maximized and we're not wasting labor. So there's a lot that goes into that. So we can do that, whatever property we have, whether it's old or new. There's, of course, you have a disadvantage. You have a hotel that needs to be renovated, whatever the case may be. You may not be able to be a green top torchbearer type hotel, but we can still do the best we can to make it profitable.
Perfect. I want to go back to a little bit more on the economics of the business. So I think it was in early 2025 you participated in a podcast and you said that hotel producing the same revenue that once generated around 40% profit margin might be closer to 35 or 36 in 2025. Has that changed right now?
Yeah.
Because the cost definitely climbed.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
now
to be
that's
honest with
like,
you, Andy, it may be 33, 34 now. It's the
wow,
expenses have gone up, right? And they're going to continue to rise. And we have to find a way to make the hotel profitable, right? I mean, there's only so much you can do with the expenses, but 33, 34 is still profitable, but it's not like it was in, 2019, 2018, right? But we have to still maximize because we owe that to our owners. But is it difficult? Absolutely. Everything is high, whether it be your towels or your chemicals or your payroll. Your payroll is probably up, 50% what it was even before, pre-COVID levels, right? So we've got to try to make that work. And I think expense management is something that we focused on more over the last 4 or 5 years than we did before. There was an old saying in the hotel business that revenue cures all ills. That's not necessarily the case now. You could actually book too many rooms now. And that sounds crazy. It's like, why? How can you book too many rooms? It's because every time you book a room at a low rate, you have to bring in a high paid housekeeper in to clean the rooms. So you book those 5 or 6 extra rooms at the end of the night, you've got to have somebody clean those rooms. And if the housekeeper's making a lot of money, it may not necessarily be profitable. So, having less rooms booked, sometimes you can make more money that way than you can in the bottom line than you can if you fill the house up. So it's definitely a work in progress, but it is becoming very difficult now. And I do feel like that the brands, they may be talking behind the scenes right now. They're probably looking at ways to make the hotels more profitable because they have to. Eventually, if they don't, and it gets down to, 30% profit margin, 28, you're going to have less people investing in hotels. So that's difficult for the brands because there's an arms race, right? Everybody wants the best breakfast and they keep adding. Everybody wants the best standards, they keep adding. But, when will that end? I don't know. So I think eventually somebody's going to step out there and, are the robots coming? I'm not sure, but if I always say if the robots can vacuum your carpet at home, why can't they vacuum the carpet in the hotel room, right? So, and that would be kind of sad, but I see that. I don't know if it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but I think that's coming. But we have to find a way in the interim to make the hotel as profitable as we can, and that's just by keeping track of things, right, making sure that we stick with our budget and we do the best we can, to maximize our potential and, don't waste expenses.
You answered a lot of the follow-up questions that I was going to ask, so that's fantastic. Thank you. Which two or three costs right now are doing the most damage today on hotel management?
Well, there's some that you really don't have you can't do anything about. Obviously, your electricity, your water, your utilities. It's kind of is what it is. It depends on where you're at because some utilities in certain cities are higher than others. I think breakfast is going to be the first thing that the brands look at because that you've got perishable items. Things go bad. You have to throw away items. Sometimes, you have a big group in house, a big baseball team, and they have four people in a room, and they completely eat everything you have in one day, right? Because you have the big boys playing baseball or soccer or whatever the case may be. So breakfast is the most difficult, and I think it's going up at the fastest rate of anything, right? And because it's perishable, we have to keep an eye in it. So we require our leaders at the property to be in the breakfast at least an hour a day to kind of see what's going on, to make sure that we're not wasting or overstocking. Of course, you still have to please the guests, but I think to try to limit some of that waste is very, very important. So I think breakfast is key. And then housekeeping, again, because the payroll has gone up. I mean, our housekeepers, believe it or not, 10 years ago were making minimum wage, especially in Texas, 7.25 an hour. Now they're getting 15, 16, $18 an hour just within 5 or 6 years. And they were probably all, doing 18, 19 rooms at a time. Now they're doing 13, 14, and you're paying them about the same amount of money. So we have to make sure that we're keeping an eye on the housekeepers. Again, it's trust or but verify. We trust them, but we got to make sure, they're not out in the hallway, talking to each other for an hour a day and, that they're getting paid for that and making sure they're productive. So housekeeping is something we have full control over. Obviously, your front desk payroll, you have to have somebody up there at all times. Your breakfast host, you have to have somebody in there. Maintenance, is more of a, I'm going to try to prepare for tomorrow by fixing this today so it, doesn't break down tomorrow. But housekeeping payroll is a big focus of ours. And, we do it by minutes per room. So we look at 27, 28 minutes per room. And that's the way we measure it by room to make sure that it's productive. So if it's 30, 32 minutes, then we can dive in to see, what is it? Is it one slower housekeeper? Again, is it a housekeeper sleeping in the room? Whatever.
When you step into an underperforming hotel, what is the first operational signal that tells you that the owner has a deeper problem than occupancy or rate?
I think the way they handle expense management is very, very important. Also, the way they handle leads at the front desk. So, expense management, that's why management companies are so important, is because we can actually build a structure for them. A lot of times we'll take over individually owned hotels and they're doing the breakfast order by the breakfast attendant writing what they need on a napkin, turning it over to a front desk agent. They type it into the system and they make their order. Nobody does inventory. Nobody's counting to see what they really need. Nobody's looking at forecasts to see how many people are really coming in. Do they need this breakfast? So putting in that structure is very, very important at the
And
beginning.
I also think that you mentioned it before, right? More rooms booked doesn't necessarily mean more revenue, right? And I
That
think this
that
is
is
one of the case. If you don't have the actual data, or if you can measure the actual data, you would never know. I mean, it's
that's
normal
right.
that we think if we book more rooms, it means more money. But all the hidden costs that you probably are not aware of, I mean,
That's
can
correct.
bulk, and it's gonna be
So that's
crazy.
why it's different now. I think we always, as an industry, especially with independent hotel owners, that we always struggled with this. But I think again, it comes back to the revenue cures all ills, because back in the day, they were probably leaving money on the table too, but they didn't know it because the costs were so low that okay, we have a 45% profit margin. Maybe we could have made it to 50, but we're happy about 40, right? It's not that big of a deal, right? Or 45. But now, unless you concentrate on what's going on, and I think some of the individual owners without management companies or structure are seeing this is like, you know what, we're filling up every night, but we're not making money. So the average daily rate is really important to us because that's how you make your money. If your rate is high enough or your average daily rate is high enough, you can sell 60 rooms and actually make more money than you can if you sell 67 or 68. So 20 years ago, if we had 5, 6 rooms left at the end of the night, we would direct our front desk team and our hotel team to, if you have to discount to get them in the hotel at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, just get them in because that room is just sitting there and you're paying fixed costs on that room and you're not making any money with it sitting there. So fill it up. But the problem is, back in the day, you were selling it 50, 60, $70 a night and you made money on it. Now you're doing that same strategy and you're not making the money, but you're basically breaking even, or you could even be losing because, again, you got to bring in that extra labor to fix the room. You got extra wear and tear, you got extra chemicals, extra towels in the laundry. So there's a lot of factors. So that's the reason that rate is so important. Yes, we have to be competitive. You have to charge, the going rate. You can't be, $30 ahead of your closest competitors, but you got to try to maximize in any way you can. So looking at revenue management, looking at 2 days out, 5 days out, kind of forecasting when you should make that move to raise the rate or lower the rate is very important. Revenue management, when I started, there was really no such thing. Yeah, you would set one rate for pretty much the entire year and say, our rate's 124 for weekdays, 119 for weekends. And you might look at the January 1st and decide, is that strategy good or not? And whether there was a conference in town, whether it was Taylor Swift, whatever, that was your rate. It never changed. So now we have to look at it day by day. And again, we were leaving money on the table back in the day, but nobody knew better. Right now we do.
Yeah, of
And,
course.
and I
It makes sense.
mentioned sales leads too. That's very, very important. So we have a shop program where we call our hotels anonymously as a training feature, not to play gotcha, but just to make sure they're actually handling the leads correctly. And we also call our competitors. So if we call 10 competitors and we ask, I need a group for June 3rd for 20 rooms, most of our competitors will say, well, there's nobody here right now. Call back tomorrow. You need to talk to such and such. And obviously, there's very limited attention span right now. They're not going to do that. They're going to call the next competitor.
Yeah.
So now we make sure that we always, keep control. Let me get your name and number. And now we can actually call them back. So that's very, very important because that's something you never know you've lost. It just disappears and, you just don't make money on the group and the group books somewhere else. So we got to make sure that any lead that comes through the front desk that we train our team to at least get that name and number so we remain in control of trying to get that lead.
Sure. So the information's always been there. The data's always existed, but we didn't know how to measure it, right? So
That's correct.
nowadays, that's what's making the main difference. And has your team done anything different to try to make the diagnosis better or faster? Is there any different tools that your guys are using now that you weren't using probably 10 or 12 years ago when you started?
I think it's just listening to what we're doing at the front desk is very important. Again, it comes back to hands-on management, right? That you have to listen to how the team is answering the phone, how they're greeting, how they're handling problems. And I think that's more difficult now. It was kind of like baked in the cake, 20, 25 years ago because, we had more hands-on management. Now you have, management that tries to sit in the office and they're thinking they can run it remotely. And it's because just of the culture. Everything's remote now. Everything's technology. You can text, you can chat GPT, everything. So I think it's forgotten that you've got to actually be in there with the people. So I don't think it's really technology that we're focusing on to make our hotels better. It's more of the people skills, and we have to talk about it now. Especially with the Gen Zs. The Gen Zs grew up by texting. They text everything, right? So they have a hard time sometimes answering the phone because the only time someone calls them on their phone is if, there's a health problem with one of their relatives and they freak out. So when they hear the phone ring, they're either annoyed or they're like, oh my goodness, my grandmother's calling. Has she fallen down? And you automatically think the worst because no one calls anymore. So we had to make sure during our interview process that we actually talk about answering phones. 20 years ago, that would have never come up. So we have to say, can you answer a phone? When was the last time you answered the phone? Just watching our front desk agents when they get up to the front desk and when that phone rings for the first time and just looking at the horror in their eyes it's just because they don't know better, right? I think Gen Zs get a bad rap sometimes, but they just don't know, how to answer the phone. And yes, we get less phone calls than we did, back when I started, obviously. We didn't have all the online booking and all that back then, but now most of our reservations do come online. But again, those group leads, when they come in, sometimes they'll just call hotel to hotel, and it's how you handle it is going to determine, if they book or not. So I think it's more of the people. I think it's just focusing on the people and actually observing and listening on, what your staff is doing.
And that's very interesting. I had a guest on a podcast, I think it was a couple of weeks ago. His name is Kevin, and he's part of the sales and marketing team in a hotel in Oakland. And he was mentioning that like the most meaningful things that he's done or he's seen is because he's out there talking to the people in the lobby and making us a small joke to a little kid that's checking out, right? Like, are you leaving too, or are you staying here? Like something like that. And those just minimal things can give you a measurement of how their stay was, how good was the overall feeling. So I'm with you. I mean, if you have people skills and you can transfer that to your team, and they can start to look for those specific maybe keys, right, and what they're seeing, it makes a lot of sense, and think bring adds a lot of value to the property.
Yeah. And it's actually more difficult to talk to guests now because, again, this is the culture that we live in. Everything is fast and easy. We have the mobile key, and we make it where you don't have to talk to anybody. I think eventually you're going to see kiosks in hotels. I mean, you're already seeing them in like the Vegas hotels and the luxury hotels, and I think it's going to come across the board to the lower mid scale and the economy hotels. It's just because of the salaries have gone so high, and I think you're going to see that. Unfortunately, hopefully that doesn't happen because I believe in the people skills of the hotel, which makes it fun. But it's difficult because a lot of the guests don't want the chit chat, but you've got to try to chit chat, and that's why again that breakfast is not only important to get into that breakfast to check on making sure we're not wasting money on food. It's also your opportunity to try to talk to guests to find out what brings them there, to make that touch point because it's so infrequent, now at the front desk, you might only have 5 minutes to talk. And a lot of times that they just want to get their key and get out. They don't want to talk about themselves like they did before. Where in the breakfast, it's more of a relaxed atmosphere. So you can try to build that rapport with the guests because in the grand scheme of things, a hotel is a hotel is a hotel, right? I mean, if you get hot water, you get an AC that works, you have a comfortable bed, maybe they're not really that pleasant, but they're okay, they're fine. But then next time they may just try another hotel. So to make yourself stand out, you've got to be unique. And in this day and age, I think you almost expect in hospitality bad service, right? When you go into a restaurant, you expect it. And when you get C service, it's like the new A because you get so much bad service in hospitality or in restaurants now. So we don't really have to have A service anymore. We preach it, but you've got to make sure they're at least giving, a B service to make sure that we stand out and we're different than everybody else to make sure that they'll come back to us next time.
That makes sense. I know, total sense. And you've talked a lot about the people, the accountability, and the consistency, right? And it comes because of having great people and great hires. So what has Berigo changed in its hiring and onboarding process since it changed, right? Because post pandemic it changed. So what have you changed in hiring and onboarding since then?
So what we found out in a couple of team meetings we've had recently is the leaders, even the leaders that we hire that do a really good job, they're dedicated, they're not very good. And again, overall, there's exceptions. They're not very good at retaining employees, good employees, and they're not very good at interviewing and hiring. So we've been focusing a lot on that, and it's been going on for a long time. Again, that went on 20 years ago too, but there was just so many people out there. So, you lose an employee, you have 18 people within an hour that would apply for the job. But hospitality is not as attractive as it was with the newer generation. So, that same position that attracted 18 applicants 20 years ago maybe only has 3 or 4. And maybe of those 3 or 4, only one, would be the one you want. And then they want, an arm and a leg for a salary. So I think hiring, interviewing is important. That's really the way we measure our property leaders right now is the staff. Again, the same philosophy I had that I measure not on my performance, I'm measured on my staff performance. Same thing. If you have a good staff, you can overcome an average leader. if they have that knack for keeping people. It's not a get rich quick scheme, obviously. If they may be coming to the hotel and they're wanting to be an engineer or a teacher. That might not be something that they want to do as a career, but we got to keep them a little bit longer than we do now. We can't have them leave in 3 months and go to another hotel. We've got to make sure they stick with us, knowing that we're not going to pay like some of the other industries do. But what we teach is life skills, so we have to kind of sell the job. And during the interview, we have to do as much selling as the applicant's doing. And I think that that is a difficult task, especially for the younger generation, to be able to kind of weed out the bad apples in advance and try to build that great team. I think that's the key, and that's the way we measure them. So if we have a lot of turnover, the leader of the hotel takes all the brunt of it, right? They got to build people that they're going to stay longer. Again, you're still going to have high turnover in the hospitality industry. And then, the recruiting. You've got to, when you go to a fast food place, you got to pass out a business card. When you go shopping, you got to pass out a business card. When you see great service, you can't, you've got to turn over every stone you can to make sure you have good people. And then once you get them in, making sure that our culture, we really believe in culture because we know that's the only way to keep people a little bit longer. You got to build that great culture. You can't just, in the past, we just threw food at them for a lunch every once a month and we thought that was enough. It's every day now. You got to make them happy to work there. And again, sell them on why this job is not just going to help you be a great hotelier in the future, but why it's going to help you be a great people person. Because the hotel business, it's great at problem solving. We always have to do problem solving in our personal life, right? You got to learn. You teaches you how to do that, how to handle conflict. It teaches you that, how to observe, body language. You need that too. So we use that to try to make it look like, okay, you come to the hotel business and you're going to learn, whether you're here 6 months, a year, or 3 years. It's going to help you in your profession, whatever that is. We would love to build future hoteliers, but probably, in one hotel, maybe 80 will probably not be in the hotel business in 5 years. So we have to make sure those people get something out of the job as well.
Sense. And now that you said the times have changed, what's the hardest role to hire nowadays? And has it changed in the past 10, 20 years?
Well, I think the front desk is for sure.
On that?
Is difficult. Now, engineering is tough just because if you're really a good at maintenance or engineering, you're probably going to eventually, become a handyman and open your own business or go to work at the factory. So sometimes that is out of your hands. But front desk is the most difficult because of the communication. So, perfect example is there was a time I was at a hotel waiting for a visit. And I was sitting in the breakfast area, and one of our front desk agents was not smiling, seemed to be down. So I told the leader, "Can you go up there and talk to this person and see why they're not smiling? Because it's very important that they greet when the people walk by and smile and be pleasant and hospitable." So he went up there and he came back, and I said, "Okay, how did it go?" And he says, "Well, I talked to the person, but they said that being nice and greeting did not come up in the interview." So my first reaction is like, "Are you crazy? That didn't come up in the interview. This is kind of baked in the cake. They should have known if they worked in hospitality." But then I had to take a step back and say, you know what? They just don't know. The new generation, you've got to put it on a checklist. Be nice, smile, and that seemed crazy 20 years ago. But you got to talk about it in the interview. You got to talk about, can you stay on your feet for 8 hours and greet people? Can you handle conflict? You got to sometimes talk about the bad part of the job, so they're not shocked when somebody just goes off the rails because their light bulb doesn't work in their room, right? You just don't know what's important to every guest. So I think that is important, is to try to find those people that can handle the people skills of it. And if you're just texting your way through the day, it's really hard when you have that first time you have to interact with a guest. So because of that, I think the front desk is always the most difficult position to hire.
And it makes sense, right? It's the first. It might be the first or the second face you see that is part of the hotel, right? First two people you see at the hotel. So and
Right.
first impressions count. So I agree
And
with you.
and believe it or not, just greeting, right? I mean, I walk my neighborhood with my daughter every day. So she's a Gen Z. And, when somebody walks by us, my reaction is like, "Good morning, how are you doing?" I don't even know this person. They live in the subdivision, they're just walking their dog or something, right? And she has a hard time with that. I'm the one greeting and she's not, right? Because she just doesn't know better because they're doing, so much of the electronics, the face to face. So again, that's the type of person that we bring into the front desk because that's about the age, Gen Z millennials that are going to be working the front desk agents. And, they have a hard time with that. So you've got to cover that at the beginning is you got to greet every guest because if you don't bring it up, they're not going to do it, right? It has to be, mapped out at the beginning. And again, I don't want to be, down on the younger generation, but it's just kind of out of their hands. That's just the way they were brought up. And we have to change the way we train them. It's up to us. We can't be the get off my lawn old guy, right? We got to be the one that's in there saying, this is how you do it. Let me demonstrate for you. And we can't be impatient or upset when they don't know that from the beginning that I'm working at a hotel. So obviously I have to greet people, right? Because that's just not the way it is anymore. You've got to actually train on it, talk about it, and demonstrate and then observe to make sure they're doing it.
Yeah, I agree. Moving a little bit more to the technology side, right? You've talked in the past during interviews that we have to be cautious about using AI. I mean, it's good for doing things quicker, communication and stuff like that. But you've been a promoter about the human element always, and you say that we can't lose that. So where has your thinking evolved? Has your thinking evolved since then? I think it was in 2025 that you mentioned this. And are you now more comfortable by letting technology handle things? Do you think AI is getting better, or you still feel that the human element is key?
I think the human element's always going to be what separates a great hotel from an average hotel. You can't use all technology. Now, technology is just one of those things that's always going to continue to expand as we go. There's no telling, like we said, if it gets to the kiosk, that's going to eliminate some of the interpersonal skills. And again, that's my fear that if that ever happens, then how you separate yourself from the other hotels? Then the hotel that's 20 years old has no chance because they're going against the brand new one. And then the brand new one does well for 3 or 4 years and they're no longer the new one. And then the next one comes. So that's my fear is that the interpersonal is very important. It is it easier with the technology where you can book online, you can run your reports in a second by just pushing a button, it'll analyze it for you. It's easier to pull up numbers, that's all well and good. But again, the people is what's going to separate it. We do things at our company trying to make ourselves unique. Like we do on our holiday weekends during the summer, we do popsicles for the kids. It's a nickel popsicle, but our scores go up during those times. We're handing popsicles out to the kids that cost a nickel. And, then the comments, they're like, this hotel's great. They gave my kid a popsicle, right? And because it's unique, again, you have to come up with ways to unique. You got to decorate your hotel. Like we had the World Cup in Houston, so we were decorating our hotel. And so when they walked in, they felt like, wow, this place is cool. Look at the decorations, the paper soccer balls hanging from the ceiling and things like that, which didn't cost much. But again, it made you unique. During that football season, obviously in the States, the weekends, NFL is big, right? Or in college football is big. So, we have our team wear jerseys of their favorite team or it's conversational piece. You have to continue to do something that the guest sees that this hotel is different. I don't know why, but they're different. There's a good atmosphere here because we're running out of options. What makes us unique? It's not just about, the brand because, you've got Hilton, Marriott, and IHG. They're all pretty much the same. They just do it a little bit different. But we got to make sure our specific hotel at Alberigo is different than the hotel next door. And we have to do it that way. So it can't be just technology, but we're going to have to adapt and we're going to have to be versatile as we go along when technology starts to take over and figure out another way to make it happen.
That makes yeah, makes a lot of sense. And I always feel I always remember in hotels when people treat me differently. And I feel like the extra effort. And I remember that hotel because of the people, not necessarily because of the amenities. So it makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned that I mean AIs and technology has been good because you can now create reports and do a lot of things in the back end, maybe with the data that is a lot faster. But do you see that there's like a technology challenge? Is it tools? Is it like you basically maybe disconnected one tool from the other, or is the adoption maybe of people using them that is that can be like the biggest challenge?
Well, I think you can have too many tools. You can have too many reports. We don't believe in a lot of reports, analyzing with the tools and find out what our problem is. Again, some of the larger companies, you're in your office basically typing a report to cover someone's rear end, to say like, here's what I did, here's what I did, here's what I did. It just goes up the chain. We don't want the leader in the office analyzing numbers all day? Do they need to look at it, 30, 45 minutes a day? Absolutely, because you need to know the numbers. But if you can overanalyze reports, because there's a report for everything right now. There's technology for everything right now. And if they're sitting in the office just analyzing, they're not making things happen. They're not making their hotel better. They're not building rapport with their team. They're not out there, greeting a housekeeper cleaning a room and, wishing them happy birthday. They're not doing that. So I think technology, we got to make sure that we don't overemphasize the importance of it. It's there. It's great to have because we had to do everything by hand when I first started. But you can't be just worried about report, report, report. Obviously, you need to make sure that the guests are paying their bills and making sure that we've got form of payment. You've got to do those things. You got to make sure where your reservations are coming from at the beginning of the day and analyze, can we get more. So you do have to look at reports, and you do have to send in reports because we have to hold our leaders accountable. But again, we do like 2 reports a week, and they're very limited, and they can do them in, 15, 20 minutes. Just kind of let us know what they're working on so we can actually assist them to be better. But we don't want them to be in the office just looking at reports and typing up reports all day. That's very important to us. And that separates our company from some of the big boys.
Interesting. No, very interesting. And going back to something you've said consistently during the conversation is that you like your managers to walk during breakfast hours or go be in the lobby talking to people, right? You said that a lot. How how do you get? I mean, you're getting feedback from these interactions, right? Is it captured immediately? Is there a way to capture it? Who needs to see it? Who needs to be aware of the things
Yeah.
that you discover?
It's important to capture it before they leave. That's the key, right? Because once they leave, they're going to go online and they're going to type a bad review for your hotel. They may call the 1-800 number for the brand and complain. And if you can get them to vent before they leave, sometimes that actually will improve the score because they feel like someone's listened to them and someone's cared. So it's the nature of the human being that they really don't complain that much, right? They usually complain with the keyboard. They don't do it. When you ask them at the front desk, is everything okay? A lot of times that they don't like confrontation either. And they'll just say everything's fine. And they go to the keyboard when they get home and they're saying, this is the worst hotel, the worst experience, whatever the case may be. And you had no chance to make it right, or you didn't get a chance to show empathy. So the only way to show empathy is to try to make them as comfortable as possible where they actually vent to you before they leave the hotel. It may be something, maybe they're walking out the door, it may be something you can't actually fix at this moment, but you can at least show empathy and apologize before they leave, and then they may give you another chance. But once they start typing on that keyboard, it's too late. So that's a big challenge, is to try to get the guests to tell us before they leave. And again, training our staff to try to inquire and do it the right way where the guest actually tells you when there's a problem.
Got it. Oh, and that makes total sense, right? I mean, at the end of the day, is what you do with the information that counts, not the information per se, right? If I see something and I just keep it to myself, I mean, I'm not improving anything. I'm not doing anything with it.
That's
So
human nature, right? I mean, I talk to our leaders a lot of times and they'll say, everybody's complaining about, somewhat something in the hotel. And I'm like, well, how many people? And it's really only 1 or 2 that complain, but there's probably 8 others that didn't complain, right? But the ones that do complain make their presence felt. And from my experience, the one that complains is actually a good thing. We always promote, we need more problems reported. And, they look at me like you're in the headlights when I say that. But if there's more problems reported, there's more problems that we can actually address with the guest. We can show empathy to that guest and we could fix it for the future guest. If we don't know it's happening, then we really can't do it. And that's important. So we've got to make sure when they come to the front desk and they check out, we don't just say, how was your stay? Maybe we'll say something like, is there one thing we could have done better? Or, would you recommend this hotel in the future? And if not, why? You've got to kind of rephrase that question to not make it easy for them to just say okay or fine, right? Because that's always a killer when they say fine or okay. You really don't have a follow up for that because then it looks like you're digging in too deep because you've already asked the question. So you've got to do something where they feel comfortable of venting. And then we empower our employees. It's very important. We're not old school where, you can't do anything for the guest without my approval because the guests today, they want immediate satisfaction. So if we can, let me give you a bottle of water to go. We apologize for that problem. Let me give you a Coke from the market. to take with you on us. If it's during the stay, let me upgrade you to a suite that's sitting there vacant anyway. You're by the elevator. I'm going to switch you now to a different floor. Maybe I'm going to discount your room. Maybe I'm going to give you priority points. We empower our employees to try to make it right, to do something for the guests where they feel like you care, because the perception is in most of these hotels when a guest has a problem that the employees really don't care. And I think we've got to show that, you know what, I may not be able to give you a free night for 3 nights, but I can give you something to show that I personally care about your predicament.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, I think you're one of the people that I've talked about in hospitality that still focuses a lot on making things right, and that human interaction is the main difference. So I love that. I love asking this next question. This is the one that I like the most. So if you had like a magic wand, right now, and tomorrow you can fix just one thing, maybe operational problem or not a market condition that you can't control, right? Something operationally in your company, what would you choose if you could fix one thing?
One thing, let's see, there's so many, right? I would say again to have our leaders be better at the communication with the staff. I think that's something again that we've been working on the last couple of years, and it's not easy, right? I don't think the leaders of today understand the importance of that. Is to make sure and show that the staff members are welcome at our hotels and making sure that we appreciate what they do. I think there's some resentment because the labor force has changed. So I think because of the high turnover, they kind of the leaders kind of get upset. They think, you know what, the staff member let me down, and it's more of a blaming on them instead of taking the blame ourselves because we didn't do the right things to retain them. Now, sometimes you can do everything that you should, and they're going to leave anyway. That's just the nature of the beast. But I think getting our leaders to understand that you've got to do the face to face greetings, you got to walk the property, you got to greet every. I mean, when I started in the hotel, maybe once a week, I would take ice cream sandwiches and handed it to my housekeepers. It cost me 20 cents a piece, right? And I would do those things because I knew that it was such a small gesture, but it made a big difference because now they knew I proved to them that I cared about them just doing something like that. So I think the new generation, if I could just get them to understand that, that's important, you got to be visible. You can't be just in the office because I think they've gone back to the office. 40 years ago, the GM of a hotel, that's what they did. They were kind of an office manager and they really didn't get out there. And then it changed where they said, okay, this is better to get out there and talk to people. And now they've kind of gone back into the office because I think they're afraid to talk to people. They're afraid if they talk to the employee is going to complain about something, I'm not getting enough money or, can I have Thursday off? And I'm not able to give them Thursday off. So they're almost subconsciously hiding in the office. So that's something I would obviously change is to get our leaders. And again, we're working on it to understand that, the people part of retaining employees is never going to go away. And if you're not out there and you're not seen, then you're not going to ever change that.
And why has that been difficult to solve like permanently? Like basically, like everyone that comes in and we have leaders, they need to communicate better or do
Yeah.
training, whatever. Why has that been so difficult
Well,
to
I
solve?
think it's just the nature of the culture that's out there right now. I think again, it goes back to the technology. If there's an easy button for everything now, and retaining employees and building rapport with your employees, there's no easy button. You can't chat GPT that, right? You got to be doing it face to face. You got to find out what their problems are. We have a at Alberigo, our first day is a 4-hour day and everybody has the same orientation day, whether you're front desk, housekeeping, maintenance. We have an agenda that you have to go over these things. The tour of the hotel, the talk about the company, making sure, finding out what their favorite lunch is and their favorite color. Actually have a lunch with them on that first day, trying to get them off to a good start because first impressions are important. And if you don't do well on that first day, there's a chance they're still looking for a job and they may not show back up the next day, right? They'll go, okay, they get an offer from the next job and they'll go there and then they don't come back. So that we put that in place because we know that's so important and we build that rapport right off the bat. And that's why we have lunch with them, because so when they go back to their significant other or their friend and they talk about, how was your first day? That's the question everybody gets on their first day. And we want them to say, it was great. The leader had lunch with me. He was excited to have me. He took me around and introduced me to the staff. And, 10 years ago, we weren't doing that as an industry. And there's a lot of companies not doing it now. They're sticking them at the front desk on the first day. And yes, they're with somebody and they're in training, but then the front desk agent that's training them will go to the bathroom and then the phones ring and they're freaking out about it. They don't have a name tag yet. They don't have a uniform. And then the guest goes up and complains. They don't even know, anything about the hotel, and they're taking that. So then they don't come back. Right. So
Yeah.
we want that first day to be memorable where they feel good about working there, getting them off and, to a great start. And then when someone gives a 2-week notice, when we hire, we require 3 touch points. We call a couple of times, and it doesn't matter what you call about. You could call about, let me go over your uniform policy on your first day. Just I wanted to chat with you to make sure there's any questions that you have, or we're excited to have you. And the reason we do that is because when they give that 2-week notice, or they told you they're giving the 2-week notice, they may still not come. And if they're not going to come, we'd rather find out before they come, right? So we talk to them before, and we're continuing to build that rapport before they ever come. Because if you don't, you're going to tell everybody we have a new staff member coming in today, and then they're coming in at 9 o'clock, and then they don't show up, and then it kind of makes you look like egg on your face. So we that's important, is to build rapport with our staff members. I know I've said it many times, but we have to emphasize that, because that's the way we measure a great leader, not how they analyze reports, but if they can build a team and kind of overachieve. You have an employee that's maybe 6 on a 10 scale. Can you make them an 8? If you a 7, can you make them a 9? Don't bring in the 2 and try to make them a 7. It's impossible, right? Because if you're a 2, you probably don't care. So you got to bring in people that really care and want to work there. So that's the key.
I love it. Yeah, it's always about the people, and it shows a lot of what you're trying to build with a culture. So I like that a lot. I like to wrap up with a lightning round, and that's okay.
Okay.
Basically, just answer what the first thing that comes to mind. Short answers. It doesn't have to be like a quick, like a very long answer, but it's basically whatever comes to mind. Let's just go there. Okay. So when an owner brings Alberigo into a property, what change do you want them to feel first?
I want them to feel that we're hands on. Very important, that to show that we're hands on and we care about their property, and they're just not another notch in our belt like some of the larger companies.
I love that one. One hotel metric that deserves more attention than occupancy.
Then occupancy.
Sorry, I said, yeah, that occupancy. I said it wrong.
Yeah. Again, it's expense management. Are we making profit?
Okay, perfect. The most overrated hospitality trend right now.
I think the most overrated is experience. You've got to hire people that are fit for the job and have the personality for the job. Just because you've worked at 18 hotels doesn't make you a great hotelier.
The the clearest sign that a hotel team has a healthy culture.
I think the clearest sign the hotel team has a great culture is turnover. We got to make sure that we're keeping most of our employees at least a year, year and a half. And I think if you don't, then obviously there's something wrong. Again, there's one-offs where, a few people just will leave, that maybe we made a bad hire. But again, it's the percentage of the entire staff. If you're not keeping people, obviously there's something wrong with your culture.
I like that answer. Last one. Finish this sentence. Hospitality will always need humans for.
Problem solving. If you don't
Love it.
have the human there, the robot's not going to do it for you, because the robot can't show empathy.
Perfect. Richard, I appreciate this conversation. It's been great. What stands out to me is that better hotel performance is not created by technology alone, or the people alone. It's a mix, right? But you've mentioned a lot about the right people, clear accountability, timely information, being good to each other, caring, listening, talking, asking, right? Serving guests properly. So I really like that part of the conversation. You mentioned that your highest priorities for the people to improve communication, right? The managers per se. So I would it's a great message, right? Because it's important, because you're always talking about how people are the differentiate the uniqueness of each property. So I think it goes along with what we talked during this podcast. So for owners or hospitality leaders who want to learn more about Alberigo Hotel Management, where is the best place to connect with you?
Yeah, so Alberigo Hotel MGT.com. They can go to our website and there's a phone number on there. There's an email on there and they can inquire. And, if an owner, we have different reasons why people use us. We have owners that are just kind of down on their luck and they're struggling, whether it be with service, the brand is starting to crack down on them. They need more occupancy, they need more sales help, whatever the case may be, we can help them. And there's some hotel owners, they just want to possibly sell their property. They want to get out of the business, but the offers they're getting are not the value of the property. So we can also come in, temporarily, and there's no buyout or anything if the hotel's sold. So if they show proof of sold closing, then they can end the contract at any time and we can come in and increase their value, increase their scores, increase their reputation, increase their service. So if they inquire through our website or send me an email, we can give them the hands-on approach that'll make them better. And that's one thing that we always do is we make a hotel better. Again, we can't make chicken salad out of chicken soup, but if they're looking for a management company that's going to partner with them, we're the one to hire. We call ourselves owner friendly because we actually let our owners have a seat at the table. We take advice from them, we consult with them because they're the ones paying the bills. So we're more of a partner than just a management company that's just going to, take over the reins and not involve the owner. So that's if they want that service and they want someone that's going to partner with them to make their hotels better, we're the management company to take.
Beautiful. I love that. So, Richard, thank you so much for joining us on Deep Current.
Thank you,
And
Andy.
yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. To everyone listening, thank you for being part of the conversation. If this episode gave you a new way to think about hotel operations, leadership, or technology, follow the show and share with someone in hospitality who should hear it. I'm Andy Monge, and this has been Deep Current. See you on the next episode.
Thank you.